are now live. After dark. How'd everyone go? How'd this week go for everyone?
This is a pretty good week.
It was an exhausting week.
Oh, it was definitely exhausting. We all had our late night adventures. There was lots of after dark to go around.
Yeah,
Um,
How about you, Zach, on the home front? How was San Francisco?
well, you know what I was going to say was while y'all were busy like signing deals with Ford and stuff, I was in San Diego on vacation because it's Hanukkah.
there you go.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but
I got to go to in Philly. I was walking to go have dinner with my old boss, and I walked through this park in Philadelphia, and it was the eighth night of Hanukkah, and they were having a ceremony in the park, and lighting the menorah. There was a little kid who was waving around this sword that was made out of like, kind of a balloon, and
yeah,
he was waving it right by the menorah, and I'm thinking that's not going to go well if that melts.
yeah,
But
Eight,
it
eight
didn't.
crazy
So
nights.
everything was. There was no little kid crying about his balloon melting, and everybody sang songs, and they were very happy. So how was your Hanukkah?
my Hanukkah was really quite nice, and it was cool because it ended and I came back to work for Thursday and Friday. I mean, it ended on Monday, but we stayed in San Diego until Wednesday just because we got good deals on certain dates for the flights. But no, we came back to work to the quarterly pivotal hack day,
Oh
um,
yeah, that looked really fun.
and it's always a cool. I'm sorry because like this week in pivotal is not very pivotally. It's sort of tangential, but yeah, no, the hack day is always this interesting thing that I think is a great way, especially the winter quarter hack day, is a great way to sort of unwind into the new year with fun projects. So there's some really cool stuff that was done. One of the engineers in San Francisco wrote NatsDB, and he named it something else, but I don't remember. NatsDB is what
It was called Juggle DB.
JuggleDB, and it
Okay.
and it works where you put like a row in the DB is is a message that the clients are just constantly sending around in a circle to each other.
Okay.
And so, and the best part of it was that it turned out to be completely fault tolerant because if you take the server down, the clients just sit on all their messages until the server comes back up to keep sending stuff.
What?
So yeah, it turns out you can use Nats as a fault tolerant NoSQL database for sending messages with the database entry as the payload.
All,
Wait.
all,
So
all databases are message queues, and all message queues are databases.
That's essentially what he was able to prove
There's a
beyond any
there's a
doubt.
there's an old Microsoft paper that walks through all that logic.
Yeah. So that was maybe the craziest thing. Last quarter, we had somebody build Bosch deploy by drone, um, where there was a drone. I can't quite. There's a box with like some keys that you had to put in. I think the drone had one of the keys, and so the drone had to fly over to give you one of the keys. It was very
hmm.
it sort of reminds me of at some point the PM on my team described working at VeriSign when they had to go get the master private key, and there's two people who are more than arm's length away, have to put keys, and a vault opens, and there's an air-gapped computer, sort of like that.
Wow. I saw that somebody did a Bosch boot one.
Yeah.
Is like to create manifests easily.
There's
There,
there's there's like 2 dozen projects, right? That I saw stream through in the mailing list.
I read the first 5 or 6 emails, and then I was like, oh man, this is getting bigger and bigger. I'll have to catch up on this on the way to work on Monday.
You're like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Well, we
Um,
did we did 5 meetups and 2 workshops last week.
so
We
that's
did.
like more than one meetup or workshop per day.
Yep. Math would dictate.
Yes. Wow.
It was. We did Philadelphia, and then we had some New York action, and then we had some DC action.
I Yeah, I did a tech talk last week in Palo Alto, and that was exhausting. Can't imagine doing. 7 in a week.
Oh, we distributed it a little. Some was me and Casey, and some was Schaefer, and some was Josh Long, and some was Kenny Bastani. So it wasn't like it wasn't all of us talking every night.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Well,
Still.
we did talk every night, but we didn't talk in front of a group. It was interesting though. We covered a lot of ground. There's definitely I don't know. If you go read the comments on the meetup, seems like people like the show.
Yeah, what I liked about it is that we got, I thought, really good questions. I mean, different questions in every city, but really good questions and ideas from people about the kinds of stuff that they want to talk about. Like it's interesting that a lot of people are still at that, like, oh, containers, maybe they're magic, but they showed up because we rubbed some Docker on the meetup title for a couple of the meetups. Like they showed up, and then they thought, okay, now we actually had someone from a bank which is considering various projects for their scheduling, orchestration, etc. tell us that this was the clearest explanation they had gotten yet of moving the discussion a little up the stack and talking more about what you need beyond just containers and the scheduling thereof.
I think, giving my tech talk in Palo Alto, where we had a number of folks come in who were not by any means even necessarily familiar with Bosch. And what I sort of discovered is that I live in this perfect bubble inside Pivotal where everybody knows all this stuff. But when you bring it to the community, there's this real hunger for an explanation that's not like Docker's fairly esoteric front page, or Ansible's like website, which is super, like it's a great job if you're already in the DevOps world. But as somebody who's like, I need to start evaluating my options, there's this hunger for people to like give you some bullet points. Here's how the basics work, and like here's the end to end of what you need: containers, and you need an orchestrator, and you need a router, and you need some CI, and how do we put this together? That like the telling of the whole story is just sorely lacking.
I would say even inside of Pivotal, from project to project, that we don't all have the same ideas about all of it, right? It's like everyone's touching the elephant in a different place.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say also, to be fair, like we can improve the front page of cloudfoundry.org more than we have. So this is definitely, we don't have all the answers and we haven't solved everything, but I'm really glad to be having these conversations with people.
Right. And one of the things too that I really placed some value in was the feedback about like the way that we present the tools that we think are good, and how like I got some really good feedback about like how we communicate why our process and why the process we advocate for is important, and a lot of it comes from like stepping back to what are the benefits? Why does this help us? Why should we do it this way? And I think that this was a problem that I sort of ran into when I was writing this, was like I work here, I sort of intuitively understand it, but how do you then tell somebody who has their process is pretty close to waterfall and they have a 6-month release cycle? How do you say to them, here's the concrete, tangible benefit you get from continuous deployment?
Well, that's actually a really great topic, because that's what a lot of our conversations this week were about. It was amazing seeing, Casey and Schaefer and others, having that moment where they're talking. And I mean, I was talking sometimes too, because you can't. It's hard to get me to stop talking. But from time to time, I will shut up and listen to these guys. And they're talking, and you can kind of see the lights going on in all of these eyes of people at large, businesses and large government, organizations, where they've clearly been doing those 6-month release cycles that you're talking about, or longer, for a really long time.
But before we talk about that, I want to go back to the meta part of what Zach was talking about, where he thought he had an insight, or that you got some feedback. Like, I want to hear you articulate what you would message different, or kind of what your insight was.
Oh yeah, and what was the feedback?
What I saw and what I received feedback from some participants and from some fellow pivots. What I saw was I initially wrote this talk as like, this is good, here's why we do it. And I ended up rearranging it to be, these things are bad, so we do it differently to avoid these bad things. And the concrete example was, I'm talking about anti-patterns in development, and so you have a Jenkins VM somewhere, maybe it's in Amazon. The person who deployed it left the company 6 months ago. You can't find it. It also has access to the internal network, but also has access somehow to the Amazon info IP address. You can't find the repo that it checks stuff out from, because it's an IP address also. It's like some crazy Git repo that somebody set up that's not on GitHub. And I'm looking out over the crowd and I see this guy in the back just like with his head in his hands like, oh yes, I know that. I've been to that circle of hell. and I sort of, this was one of the first talks I'd given, and so I happened upon this thing sort of organically, but one of my coworkers pointed out, this is called building empathy, and I think that I'm starting to see it now in the way we communicate more, is this idea of like, we need to stop banging the drum of this is good, come do it this way, and start saying like, hey, slow down, look at the way things are going now, and tell me that you don't see a need for something better. And I think that was this sort of epiphany that I had that apparently other people had a long time before me, but to me it was new. Was like, oh, I need to start thinking about like, and I'm young and I started my career at Pivotal, so for me, like, I've only ever done it the right way. And so it was this sort of new like, oh, like there are people who aren't in the world of CD and aren't in the world of, infrastructure as code. And introducing these concepts needs to come from talking about why we do it this way in the first place. Why are we here? Why have we come to the conclusion that this is the thing that's a good idea? And we came to that conclusion because we wanted to stop banging our head against like random Jenkins VMs that we can't find.
Did that actually happen to you? Because that's hilariously specific.
Yeah, that was a real thing.
Oh my gosh. How? Like, there's so many questions. Like, why did somebody set up the Git repo on? Did they just stand up their own GitLab or something? Like, what? Why? What?
This was something I touched briefly as an intern, and then we like tore it down and never talked about it again. We were just like, okay, we don't need this.
Just paper that over. People love a bad on dresser. Just build a wall.
Exactly. So, but no, and I think that it's like, sort of that memory of that was a good reminder that even at Pivotal, like, we have a history. We're only doing things, what I say, the right way now because we began by doing it the wrong way, and we learned, oh, shoot, that's like not so useful for us. And we're lucky that at Pivotal we have the buy-in top down to say, okay, go deploy, Concourse and actually do it the right way. But having to explain this to the world, where you're an engineer at a company and all you know is the hell of snowflakes. All you know is the 6-month release cycle that you're deploying with Capistrano directly to a VM that you manually provisioned. If all you know is that, and you're trying to break in, you're totally right. Like, cloudfoundry.org does a okay job of explaining why it's better. Ansible does an okay job of explaining why they're better than Capistrano. Docker does an okay job of explaining why they're better than manually provisioning VMs. But it needs to start with, look at how terrible the way things are. Look at this. Look at how bad this is. Because it's crazy. And it's just so surprising to me, coming from, out of university straight to Pivotal, that people haven't staged a revolt.
Hey, you might be part of the revolt.
There's the point when I sort of was like, do I co-work at Pivotal or not? And then I was like, I want to be part of the revolt.
So I'm curious, when you were at university, did they talk at all about like CI, CD, I don't know, even like distributed version control? Because I
Not,
hear sometimes from people that they don't tell the kids these days about that stuff, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, what did they tell you?
so I had a really, I honestly, I left before I graduated. And I had two really good professors, and I found university incredibly inspiring. And the reason that I left was because the place that university was at in terms of the process that they were teaching people would have been, revolutionary in 1985. And that's not to say that there's not amazing things to be learned, but one of the problems I had was I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to take cat. I wanted to be a software developer. And I think that, and again, your mileage may vary, and I don't want to make blanket statements about academic CS education in the United States, but it's heavily oriented towards research.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot of research projects sponsored by academic institutions that are being hosted on GitHub and that have any test coverage. Like, this is the thing, and my professors.
There are some, but
There are some.
they're the exception, not the rule. I
Yeah.
agree.
And I think that one of the other big problems is that professors are researchers. They're not writing software that's going to be consumed by a user. They're making proofs. They're essentially practical mathematicians.
Well,
And so
isn't that kind of one of the things about research universities is the incentives are around publication. So this is kind of back to the, like we have these problems in industry too, right? Of like you get more of what you incentivize.
absolutely,
Publish or perish.
absolutely. And I don't want to make any value judgments about that. It is what it is. And for me, what I sort of realized was where I want to be, which is in the industry writing software, was ahead of what I was learning. And frankly, pairing with like the amazing people that I was pairing with at Pivotal, I learned more in a 6-month internship than I learned in 2 semesters of advanced computer science classes. And that's not to say that I learned more of what CS degree could have taught me. I learned more of what I wanted to learn about software engineering.
Right, right.
And
I mean,
it's a trade-off.
right. Like, I mean, I'm not sad that I got a CS degree, and I don't feel like I use all of the stuff in it, in work regularly. But like any degree, it's not, for lack of a better term, like training. It's education, which is a different thing, right? Like it teaches you to think, in theory, if it does a good job, it teaches you to think and to reason and to cooperate and to, follow through. I mean, to maybe use the scientific method even, as well as, big O notation. Like,
One of the things I learned at university was how to read documentation. I mean, there's a number of skills that I can directly credit to spending 2.5 years studying for a CS degree. Was, I started programming really in depth in high school, and I didn't graduate beyond being able to type what I learned from the tutorial and getting, like, I didn't graduate beyond modifying that and expanding on that and reading docs and reading an API. And came out of university and I started Pivotal, and I felt very comfortable. Okay, I can go to godoc.org and comprehend, like, oh, this method does what I need it to do. I can now apply that to the grander scheme of what I want to achieve functionally in the software that I'm writing. And absolutely, I think that the critical thought that's required to make that plan from reading documentation absolutely came from university education. Which is not to say that it couldn't have come from pairing or it couldn't have come from Dev Bootcamp or whatever, but yeah, I think there's huge value in studying CS academically.
so, okay, so for people who are not in a position where they're going to go back and do, a master's in software engineering or whatever, but they do want to improve, it sounds like pairing with people who do understand the stuff is one step that they could go through that might help.
I learned more about SQL than taking a graduate databases course from pairing for a week on an optimization issue with a Rails engineer. And that's not to say that the professor was bad. That's not to say that the course was slow. It's to say that I think there's certain things that you only learn by, oh shoot, this query takes 16 seconds. What the heck do we do? And you spend the next week on Google and on SQL documentation and reading blog posts and pairing the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's not a lot of replacements for the experience of sitting next to somebody who really knows what they're doing and typing.
Yeah. No, I could definitely see it. Or even if you're not doing the pairing part of that, well, shit, everything is on fire. What is it? It was a Charity Majors had a good, quote from the talk she gave at Operability. Remember, Andrew? She was like, everything's on fire, and suddenly you're an expert in Redis at 3 a.m.
That's exactly what it was. There's at the end of the week, and I'm not going to claim I'm an expert in any way, but by the end of the week, I knew at least enough SQL to feel comfortable writing queries that weren't, active record.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
But I think that, I don't know, I talk about pairing a lot, and I talk about this at all my talks, and I talk about this with my coworkers and my friends, and basically I'm at the point where I'm young enough that people forgive me for speaking in absolutes, but I never want to work for a company that doesn't pair. And that's basically like, a year and a half at Pivotal, and I'm done. I'm like, okay, pairing, that's the way to write software.
Nice. Well, and so that's actually something that I find interesting, because you talked a little bit before about like change coming from maybe top down, like how useful it is that leadership at Pivotal agrees with you, for example, about pairing. But then I'm kind of imagining future Zach going into some other company and just starting some like Rebel Alliance rogue pairing. Just be like, we're going to do this. Like, what do you think about, the direction that change can come from?
I think that change can absolutely come from the bottom. And, my grandparents were basically professional activists in the 60s. And so I have this sort of like familial belief in change from the bottom up. But I'll say this, when your CEO is in the office on Fridays walking around going, are you pairing on that? Are you pairing on that? Are you pairing on that? It helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like, it's helpful that Rob Me thinks that everybody should pair when writing software.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend, ex-coworker, who went to work at healthcare startup, and now I'm super blanking. And they didn't pair, and he joined them to help them out with DevOps, and he's slowly getting more pairing to happen. I think it's a real thing. I think it's one of these things where it's sort of almost seductive in, once you get somebody pairing, then they like it because it's awesome. So of course it will spread. Mm-hmm. But again, it's change is a lot easier when it's coming from all directions.
Mm-hmm. So for the people that we were talking to last week, Andrew, like, what kinds of change, either in these like, practice procedural things like pairing, or what other changes do you think that large organizations that want to change are going to start with or should start with?
Such a loaded question. It's hard to discuss some of the people we talked to last week.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about them specifically, but just large organizations.
So I was using this in some of the talks I was giving this week, that that every happy family is alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So mm-hmm. I think sometimes the transformation that's needed I don't believe there's like a connect the dots, paint by numbers way to transform
Mm-hmm.
that you have to be thoughtful and contextual about what you're doing. To me, from kind of an engineering agile software perspective, everything really starts with being able to build from source reproducibly, and then as you extend to services with whatever kind of DevOps mentality, that should include the actual infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I think pairing is a great practice. I think lots of people would benefit from adopting it. I think it's so far away from the way many people work, and that pairing itself is a skill that you kind of need pairs that are equipped and experienced with that skill to teach you. If you just start pairing up, you will have some benefit, I think, but it's not the same. Just like TDD is a skill, just like any of these things are skills, you kind of need someone who knows how to do it to show you. You know, any other skill you're going to benefit from having coaching and mentorship. I feel like it's the same sort of thing. So when I look at what people are doing, if they're able to build from source and they can build their stuff, and they should really focus, to me, on continuous integration. I think it's kind of dangerous when people are trying to get to a continuous delivery model and they haven't really got continuous integration yet. That
Is that even a thing?
Oh.
happens all the time.
How do they think that will work?
They're
Just
like,
deploy it. Just push it.
they're like, let's cut the brakes on the car. It'll probably be fine.
Oh my God.
Ship it. Do it live. Who cares? No, I think Andrew's totally right. Pairing's not a panacea any more than continuous integration alone is a panacea, any more than continuous deployment, any more than having good test coverage is a panacea. Where it comes in, and he's also totally right, it's a skill. It's a skill that takes years to cultivate and develop. And yeah, it's a thing. It's part of the puzzle of. And I think my manager at Pivotal put it best. He said to me, "We're working on finding the most humane way to write software." And I think that it's just part of the pieces that you put together to find that humane way of writing software. And it's lucky that writing software in a quote humane way turns out to be also very efficient from a financial perspective and from a risk perspective. But it comes back to, if you're just pairing, if you just suddenly tell people, hey, pair up, share a keyboard, that's not going to go over so well, and that's not going to solve any problems. If you try to build a culture that, like you say, incentivizes these specific ways of writing software that put value on the benefits you get out of CI and the benefits you get out of CD and the benefits you get out of not having to do a code review before pushing commits, if you incentivize those things, suddenly pairing starts to make more sense.
I think one of the things that is the big difference is when you see the willingness to invest in the future, and it's not just about, oh, this is a project that we're going to finish, but it's actually the organization itself is investing in itself. Because I feel like one of the biggest benefits of pairing is the osmotic spread of information and skills through the teams, right? If you ever pair with people, then you see someone do something with a tool and you're like, oh, how did you do that, right? Like you're constantly learning from each other in a way that doesn't happen if you go off for 8 hours a day every day and just do your own thing and then kind of try to do integration through the CI. So to me, I feel like pairing, I think there's plenty of arguments and evidence that says that you get at least as much code written, and that the code you write is lower, has lower bugs and is higher quality. But to me, it's actually the investment in the people that makes it the most worthwhile. And you have to take a long-term view of software and in the investment in software and the investment in the organization to have that realization.
I think it comes back to exactly what you said. And this is what I think like Bridget has been leading us towards, is the idea that writing software is a super organic process. It's not it's
more,
not just a thing that happens mechanically.
It's more art than science.
Yeah, and it involves communication, and it involves the sharing of information, and all of these things are human processes, not mechanical processes. And so, in order to achieve a really powerful team of people capable of iterating and developing really good software, you have to have a way of spreading information across that team. And you have to have a way of rotating expertise throughout the organization. And basically, where we're at is pairing is the best way to do that.
You know, I have like all sorts of thoughts about the way that pairing keeps information flowing, you know, actively between people, but really only in the smaller groups when they're interacting. I'm kind of wondering, like, how do you balance the intensity of pairing with the need to document and disseminate information to the rest of the org? And I don't just mean with your PM, because you know as well as I do that the PM is not going to write absolutely everything about every piece of software.
This is a problem that we are only now beginning to even realize exists. And okay, so I don't mean to speak out of turn. There's lots of people who have seen this exist, and lots of people who have foreseen this, and lots of work going on at Pivotal to help fix this. But really what it's starting to become a painful thing is this thing that we don't have processes around documentation beyond, oh, go pair with somebody from that team whose product has an API that you need to consume. And we're working on that, and suddenly, you know, we need to transform our own process from something that was not oriented towards writing consumable APIs generically and then documenting them to that. And, you know, we have literally the best engineers in the world from all over the world, and now we're starting to realize, okay, now we need to start writing some docs. And
yeah. The durable communication, it is actually a thing. Casey West wrote a really good blog post about it.
Yeah. And there's you know, there's like the frickin' docs team in San Francisco are invaluable. We wouldn't
awesome.
get anything done without them.
They can't write everything for everyone all the time, though.
No. Bummer, though.
Well, because they can't capture what's in your head, right?
No.
And like that, I want to say one more thing about that, and then I want Tony to introduce himself because he's joined the call. But I was reading something really interesting about NASA, how they want to rewrite some software, and it's literally 2 generations of humans old. And they're reduced to going back and reading the mail of the developers from back then to try to figure out what they were thinking, because they can read the code and see what the code does. What they don't know was what was the thought process and decision making that went into writing this code. Like, no one knows, and they're reading like paper mail from the 60s to try to figure out what was desired.
You know, NASA's not the only one running into this problem. We every day we're trying to fix a bug in some legacy code, and we say, why? I get that the result is this functionality, but why did you do it that way? And then you get blame, and it's you, and you're like,
you're like, 6 months ago, me, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
I can't go back and ask him, can I?
Yeah.
But popping up one level, this is a point I was making a few times this week, that why is much more powerful than what when you're trying to make decisions. If you're in the middle of code and you can see what it does, like, that's a level of power, but you're kind of doomed to replicate that functionality until you understand why. Like the types of refactoring you can do and the types of, you know, even deleting code you can do when you understand why is an order of magnitude more powerful and more flexible than if you just know what's there.
Yeah, I believe that's 100% right. But yeah, so Tony, you've joined us. Please say hi. Tell us about yourself.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
That's probably fine.
That makes 4 of us.
No, I'm just I just saw this thing on Twitter, and so I just joined it. So
awesome.
We're talking about software.
Okay, cool.
The proper.
Cool. I am a network administrator, instructor by trade. So I'm, you know, It's intersecting a lot with continuous integration, continuous delivery, and cloud native and all that stuff. So I teach a lot of mostly Cisco courses and OpenStack and that kind of thing. So
well, the network world is becoming more and more software defined, right? Like that's the buzzword of the day. And when you start to be able to have APIs to manipulate things, then it starts to look suspiciously like software development.
Yeah, and I think APIs, especially like RESTful APIs, are a huge game changer in terms of automation of networking, because we really haven't had a lot of useful tools for automating network configurations. For the past 20 years, Cisco administrators, Juniper administrators, etc., we've been mostly doing things by just banging out config on individual switches. So
by hand. Oh,
yes.
I know.
Yeah, it's still, even today, most networking configurations are done by hand, which is, especially in software and in server administration, that's just inconceivable.
And how about cleaning up this week's Juniper backdoor? That also is by hand?
Yeah, probably. Going
Is
through
that the Screen OS thing?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I have this. Well, I don't know the entire backstory behind it, but I think it's that the Screen OS just had a administrator backdoor that they could go in and say, "Oh, hey, can you log into my device and check my config for me?" And it was just kind of a single password that they could go in, and I think that's what it was. I'm not 100% positive, but they're not the only vendor that's had that, and I know other vendors that have that exact same thing.
I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to sign off now. Tony, it's nice to meet you. Sorry that I'm leaving just as soon as it gets interesting.
No worries.
No sorrow. There's no sorrow necessary.
And Zach Cooper. We've already got more Zach than we thought we were going to get, because he's got an early morning commuting to San Francisco tomorrow.
No tears. Only dreams now.
All right. It was great to finally talk to you, Bridget, and hopefully I'll see you all next week.
And Zach, it's good to meet another fellow cat enthusiast.
Cheers.
Oh man. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. My cat is actually like right there. Like she's sleeping next to me.
But going back to this notion that I feel like the networking has it's been frozen in amber for a while.
Oh yeah. And
just in the last few years, there's been a proliferation of interest and effort on the software-defined networking. I really think there's a lot of room for that to evolve, and it'll evolve rapidly over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most data center. Speaking from a data center perspective, so there's campus networking, there's wireless networking, there's service provider networking. So I work entirely in the data center, so I can only speak to the data center part. But you're absolutely right. We've been frozen in amber for the past 20 years. The way that we've done networking 20 years ago is the same way we do it now. Bang out a config on every individual device. And we're only now just starting to do like infrastructure as code and continuous integration, continuous delivery, where we're starting to be able to. We have to deal with an ephemeral compute platform. So containers and virtual machines that are winking in and out of existence all the time. We can't keep up with those configs by hand. So, so it is changing.
I think that was one of the things that drove the server config software as code forward, is that you basically got to the point where you were overwhelmed unless you solved this problem with software. But for the most part, you still kept those on these flat, L3 networks, and you didn't have to do tons of dynamic network configuration. But now with this new, as you just sort of articulate some of the things driving it, this new world of ephemeral networks, there's no way that a human being can keep up with that and do it at the speed that the business needs.
Yeah, we keep talking about SDN, and the problem with software-defined networking as a term is that it suffers the same problem cloud computing had until NIST came out with their definition in 2010.
It's whatever this vendor wants it to be.
Yeah, so we've got SDN washing. I wrote 5 lines of Python, and now I'm an SDN platform. So how does it feel to be poor, suckers? And then when this came out with the definitions, at least it was a line in the sand. It said, like, you have to be these 5 things in order to be a cloud computing platform. And I think one of the biggest game changer in terms of networking, and again, I'm just speaking in terms of a data center networking perspective, is that we are, it's got to be self-service. So we can't, I mean, in networking we rely on request tickets. And that's how we've been doing it for the past 20 years. You put in a request ticket, hey, I need a load balancer config change, I need a firewall rule, I need whatever, and we go on and we do it by hand. And now we have these APIs where we can, there's platforms from like Cisco ACI where they've got APIs that you can just throw commands at and spin up a network, spin up a default gateway, whatever. So that's the biggest change in networking, I think, that we're going to see is the self-service concept of cloud computing.
So are you seeing some of that? Like I'm sorry, Tony. Even if I do know, if I know you on Twitter, I'm sorry. I know a number of people on Twitter, so it's possible I don't know what kind of organization you work in. Like, are you in? You mentioned a campus, but do you mean like the corporate campus or an academic campus?
So I was talking about different. So I'm a IT instructor. I'm a CCSI, Cisco Certified Systems Instructor. So I teach primarily Cisco courses. I don't work for Cisco, but I mostly work in the Cisco world.
Gotcha.
And so when I talk about campus networking, I'm talking about like building to building, put in a closet. And that's a different style of networking that I don't really deal with. I deal with just the data center.
Okay, because what I'm kind of wondering is when you're mentioning the self-serve stuff, I wonder, well, are the network administrators or security people who make the firewall rules changes from those tickets that you mentioned, are they going to be okay with self-serve? Like, does that start to be kind of a cultural problem of getting people to say yes to letting others use the API?
We already know the answer to this.
Well, I mean, but I'm not sure because I don't spend a lot of time with data centers. Maybe the people that Tony is dealing with are actually like, oh yeah, those people over there, we're fine with giving them access.
So I mean, I teach. I'm in front of different students every week, and almost all of them are terrified of this coming change. Not all of them, but there's a pretty big fear of like self-service and automation. And am I going to have a job as a network administrator? And my answer is always, of course. If anything, these networks are going to be more complicated than the ones that we have. They're just going to be more automated. And it's going to require an even higher skill set in order to understand and maintain them. So as a network administrator, I provide exactly zero benefit to an organization by typing in VLAN 100 on a Cisco switch or a Juniper switch or an Arista switch. The value that I provide the organization is knowing what that means, knowing that it's a broadcast domain, knowing that I need to interconnect it with another layer 2 domain through an SVI and that kind of thing. So that knowledge is still going to be needed. We're just not going to be doing things by hand. And the same thing happened in network administration. So I started out my career as a condescending Unix administrator, and we went through the same thing, of course. We went from bare metal machines that had uptimes that were measured in years, and then we moved to virtualization. And in virtualization, we scripted things out. We did things by hand. And cloud computing, of course, everything is immutable images, and we just spin them up and tear them down, and pets versus cattle and all that. So I think we're gonna go through the same change. Our roles will be the same, but our day-to-day job will be fairly different.
So the pattern I saw, watching the servers go through this, is that the administrators are afraid of two things. One, that they won't have a job, and then two, that they somehow don't have control anymore. They're worried that, somehow I have more control typing these repetitive commands into something than I do if I just let the computers do the competitive or the repetitive commands. And what I think we've seen happen, and this is in some ways the quote-unquote DevOps movement, is that there's not less demand for those skills right now. There's more demand. Because following quote-unquote Javon's paradox, as we become more efficient at utilizing a resource, we don't use less of it, we actually use more.
Yeah, and I think there should be one thing that that we should acknowledge is that it is somewhat terrifying to be in this world right now, because in the networking world right now, because there's so much change, and there is so much to keep up with. I mean, we went from a world of a very static environment to now we're seeing, you know, virtual machines vMotioning left and right, and now we've got immutable images being spun up and spun down on things like OpenStack, public cloud versus private cloud, and now we've got containers, and now microkernels are now a thing. So just, you know, I've just learned about NVMe, and just keeping up with all this stuff is quite a challenge. So it's terrifying from if you've been studying this traditional routing and switching for the past 20 years. There's a whole lot of new stuff that's come along that is very terrifying, and it's a, you know, not an reasonable fear to have, that, you know, am I going to have a job in 4 or 5 years, or even 2 years?
I think if you attach your identity to your task, then that certainly drives those fears. But if you can understand the principles and the value of the domain expertise, you're going to have a lot of opportunities.
Absolutely, and if you can keep up with even 1/4 of what's going on, then you're going to have a leg up as things change. But I think in order to stay relevant, your skill set's going to have to grow, and it's going to. We sort of saw this when virtualization came about. If you were a network administrator, you could not avoid the endpoints anymore. So as a network administrator, most of us had to learn a little bit about vSphere. And I think that trend is continuing now. As network administrators, we're dealing in the storage area. So now we need to know Fiber Channel and iSCSI, and we need to know more about things like OpenStack and so forth. So we have to expand our knowledge, and that's a little bit scary. But as we increase our domain knowledge, we increase our value to our organization. So.
And maybe on the bright side, those a little bit of an echo. Maybe on the bright side, they will never again have to drive to the data center because they didn't type right before rebooting that switch, right?
Yeah, most of us in the networking world, we've all been there, and I'm sure the server world did too, where you mess up and you have to go and so forth.
What's up, Los Angeles?
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Lon.
Hey. Sorry, I've been listening for a bit, and I figured I'd stop lurking and actually join the hangout. So.
What do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this ends up being like not just it's the same thing that we went through on the server and database side when in the earlier days of DevOps, of, you know, how do we trust our coworkers? I mean, if you start building, I think the network is sort of the last bastion around a lot of this automation, and so as you start to offer APIs around it, it's the same conversations that we had 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's just you know, I don't think it's so much about fear of automation. I think it's more of fear of lack of control as you start to trust your colleagues and provide a service rather than, providing an API that's a service rather than providing a human that's a service, I guess is the...
And storage to be last.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess outside of the cloud, yeah, storage is probably the last part, yeah. I don't think we see enough, I mean, especially at the DevOps days, I don't think we see enough folks talking about network automation. I hope that's something that we can change in 2016. I don't know that we'll fix it in DevOps Day LA in 2016, but in some of the other places it'd be great. Well,
when do you open your CFP?
It's closed already for LA. That's why I said I don't think we'll solve it for LA just yet, except for maybe open spaces. Oh, sorry, the April one. Yeah, I don't know yet. We're figuring that out.
So, Tony, whereabouts are you located?
I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Ah, Portland is going to be having a DevOps Days.
Yep. And I think we're turning into kind of a DevOps paradise in some regard. Puppet's based out of here, and a couple other companies are moving here.
Puppet's there. Intel is there.
Yeah.
There's a couple campuses. There's it'd be interesting.
Yeah, Portland had a DevOps Days. I think it was 2013, and it looks like they're going to have another one this year. So if you want to start thinking about what you might want to give as a talk and propose it to a Portland CFP, Tony, you could be talking about this to the DevOps Days crowd.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. And there's the Seattle one just slightly north of that too. That's probably worth chatting with too.
Cool. Check it out.
Yeah, DevOpsDays.org has the info that you seek.
I'll look it up.
So Lon, you've been over at Datadog for a while, right?
Yeah, about 6 months now, give or take.
What are you seeing around the evolution of this?
I think it's a lot of it's around.
Anything in the industry, really.
I mean, I think it's just it's a lot of everything old is new again. A lot of folks are. So I think when folks were first moving into whatever we call cloud now with VMs, we were having lots of folks were implementing dynamic infrastructure patterns, and then towards the end of that cycle, I think it became, or towards more recent years in that cycle, folks have just sort of been lifting up a thing they had in a data center and dropping it off in somebody else's data center and virtualization, and maybe not adopting all of the same practices, at least on the first step. And I think we're going through the same cycle right now with containers, as everybody's as everybody's looking at things like Kubernetes or Cloud Foundry or whatever it might be. They're starting to realize, like, okay, I can't name all of my servers by the planets and or something like that and expect them to all be around forever. I should find some way to automate them, automate my infrastructure and have it be a little bit more dynamic than that. And so they're starting down that path. I'm curious to see if we manage to keep it for longer than a couple years this time around. I don't know that we'll have a choice given just how the current path is, the current path of schedulers is going, and I think that's a good thing. But yeah, that's sort of what I'm seeing right now.
So you're sort of postulating that we will rebuild the sins of the past in whatever the new paradigm is.
I hope that is not the case. I'm saying we history has seemed to repeat itself in the last couple chapters. So I think it's something we need to keep an eye out for.
There was my coworker Casey West and I from Schaefer's team went and visited the fine folks at 18F in DC on Thursday, I think it was. Yeah. And what they told us is that they had a no clown car policy, which is to say they didn't want people just slapping a whole bunch of stuff into a Docker container and like throwing it on their cloud.gov platform.
Yeah.
They were like, let's be thoughtful about what we're constructing.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a running joke at this point. But what's your problem? Okay, cool, you can solve that. Let's just rub some Docker on it, or some Kubernetes on it, or some Cloud Foundry on it, or whatever it might be. And I think like every technology, at some point it's going to become the latest trends are going to become this thing that the late adopters they pick it up because that's the new and exciting thing that we should be using, and let's just drop everything in there. So yeah, I don't know. It's like it's the same thing with the term DevOps, right? For a number of years, I don't want to say that we had it defined, but it had a certain theme to it, and now a DevOps engineer is the guy that gets paid a little bit more money on the Indeed job posting.
And is not always a guy.
Sorry. Yes.
Well, it's also the person who is between the developers and the operations.
Yeah.
So you have a new silo in the middle.
Yeah.
That's how you do it, right?
I take the requirements from the customers and give it to the engineers, I think is the Office Space quote.
Yes, damn it, I'm a people person. Why don't you people understand that?
Yeah.
I see Tashar joined us. Hey Tashar, you're still awake.
Yeah, I was actually listening I was driving back, so I just got back home.
Wow, okay.
It's pretty cool with technology. You can listen onto the YouTube channel while driving back, so it's quite interesting.
Were you watching too, or just listening?
Just listening. Like the video was on, but focusing on the drive because it's raining here.
I'm glad you made it home safe.
Yeah.
Distracted driving due to Cloud Foundry or Cloud Native After Dark is not something that we want to have.
No, I was just listening.
But I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
So in the Datadog, we use the product right now. I'm just curious what you're seeing, like that evolution of the metrics and I don't know. It seems like that is kind of poised to evolve quickly as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what we're seeing folks do finally, and it's sort of what we're speaking to is rather than asking, it's really sort of taking the data that's coming from your underlying infrastructure, whether it be like a cloud provider like Amazon or Azure or GCE, or your container provider like Docker or some scheduler, take that metadata and use that to sort of craft queries about your infrastructure, rather than say alert me on alert me when CPU is high on node 1. You say you ask questions about your work, like what is your service that happens to be in a bunch of containers supposed to be doing? Is it supposed to return some API calls? Great. Let's come up with a query that rings true, whether it's 2 containers or 1,000 containers today. And I think a lot of this stuff are things that we started to come through in 3-4 years ago, when folks were just starting down the cloud path, and we're revisiting it again because I think a number of organizations sort of deviated from that as you sort of got complacent or lazy and started to treat Amazon and Azure and GCE as the same thing you had in your data center.
I mean, I think in some ways it's the same pattern you see when programmers learn a new language, and
Yeah.
they write in the idioms that they know.
Yep.
Instead of adopting the new patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know any better and you have the pressure to deliver something, then you're just going to ride the bike you know how to ride.
Yep.
What did they say? You can write C in any language?
And I mean, that's not a value judgment. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, but I think if you do it, like you said, not a value judgment, but it's a question of, are you getting the best value out of the technologies you've picked? Like I can probably take, we can probably take some crazy COBOL application, figure out how to compile it to run wherever and run in the cloud too. It just is the pattern that you picked there when you wrote this thing in the many decades ago still valuable now? I don't know.
Are you trying to tell me something?
I don't know. Is Cloud Foundry written in COBOL?
No. The Docker that I have running COBOL on Amazon right now.
So I think it's just a question of, like I said, are you getting the best value out of the technologies that you picked? And if not, then maybe you should. Maybe we need to reevaluate the choices we've made as we got down here.
I think one of the problems that we have, and I don't know how to fix this in short order, is that the skills to do this are kind of an oral tradition, and that there's not very many people who've been exposed to these patterns in a way that they can replicate them.
Yeah.
And it's not really being communicated. Right, like I feel like there's a bunch of stuff that happens in conferences where some of that happens, but there's no conference right now that I feel like totally captures this kind of new architectural paradigm. Like everyone sort of dances around aspects of it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think there's.
Are you getting invaded?
Yeah, I may switch rooms here. I think there's a number of new conferences now, like the Operability IO folks and the HashiConf and a bunch of other ones that I think start going down these paths. It's a little different than what we might talk about at DevOps Days or Scale or some of these other conferences. So, but you're right. I don't know that's the way to reach the wider masses beyond just what's in beyond just the couple hundred folks or 1,000 folks that attend these events.
Well, I just keep coming back to, I feel like there's this architecture conference that's missing. It's not a software architecture conference, it's a system architecture conference.
I think some of the challenge there is that there's so many new things coming about that it's hard to pick a technology, pick a methodology, because someone else is coming up with here's a better way of doing things, and here's a new way of doing things, and And I just learned about unikernels like a month ago, and that's like a whole new thing. And we were talking about containers and all these different technologies and Golang and all this. There's just a flood of new things that are coming out that it's hard it's hard to follow, which way everything is going because everything keeps changing.
Well, I think the change always happens. It's just a question of how fast things actually change, right? The thing that I would go there is almost everything you said is in some ways similar, right? The principles are more important than this. This kind of goes back to this notion of why that we had earlier. Unikernels, containers, and Go all kind of have this unifying theme that they create deployable artifacts that are all self-contained with the full dependency, right? And the difference between basically the difference between a unikernel and a container is, are you carrying the full weight of a multi-purpose operating system underneath it, or do you just have that system calls exposed for the hypervisor? But those principles of architecture, like building like scalable infrastructure, I don't think those change at all. It's because it kind of comes down to physics. It's the laws of physics. Like, how do we capture, what's the grand unifying theory that like makes all this stuff kind of make sense from first principles, instead of here's the one way that you do this technique with this one technology.
Right. Yeah, I think talking about the patterns is going to make a lot more sense than you can talk about technology to illustrate the patterns. But talking about the patterns makes more sense than just going into detail on one specific technological implementation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the reasoning behind a lot of this is the same thing we went down in the Java world, maybe whenever it was ago that we had when we were doing wars and years then, right? It was grab all of our dependencies, show them together in one thing, so that we have control over our environment. We've just come up with better or different ways to do that now, and it's just sort of, again, everything old is new again. So we just got to make sure that the patterns live past the early adopters.
Absolutely. So we made it an hour now.
Yeah.
How long should we plow into the night?
I'm likely going to drop off here in a couple minutes, as it's I just realized it's past midnight.
It's 2:03 a.m. Central Time, which is where I am.
We are through the looking glass, people.
Well, plus Schaefer and I spent the week on the East Coast, so it feels like 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
I still have more cocktail left.
Well, you better drink that. I'm probably going to do some actual work before I go to bed.
Work is a thing.
You're on the West Coast here as well, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm just up the road. Where do you live in Los Angeles?
So I actually live in the Bay Area. I just happen to be in LA and for the next month or two. So I'm in Encino at the moment.
Did you always live there?
No, I'm from LA originally, and then work and my wife's school had us move up to the Bay Area, and so I just I relocate to LA every December, January ahead of Scale and DevOps Day stuff.
Got it.
So it's a way to come visit family. So.
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles since June.
Cool. Welcome.
So if anyone has any secrets or ahas they want to throw out there, let's do that, and then we'll call it a night. What did you learn this week?
I think this week I learned that while all unhappy organizations may be unhappy in different ways, there are a lot of common patterns. Like, I ended up going and watching Star Wars Thursday night at the Smithsonian at the Air and Space Museum, because reasons. And afterwards, I'm sitting there at this satellite place, which has boozy milkshakes and, like, sliders and stuff. It's, I suppose, exactly what drunks want after Star Wars movies. And Mikey Dickerson is telling me about how, these IT organizations in government have so many of the same challenges as the large IT organizations, corporately. And, like, the incentives are different, and so therefore how you can get people to change behavior is slightly different, but like it's all the same problems everywhere. And I hadn't really realized that like even organizations that on the surface look totally different, they have very similar challenges. So doesn't mean you can solve them the same way, but a lot of the problems are pretty much exactly the same.
So the answer is the blue pill? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if pills are actually going to solve this. It's like red, blue, or other. I think it's more that listening to where everything hurts, but also, as Tony was alluding to earlier, what everyone's afraid of is a really good place to start to help them move towards something better that they will actually accept.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Is it's often easy to have this platitudinal answer about what you should do, and I've done this before where people, you tell them exactly what you would do, and they're like, "There's no way." It's like there's literally no way we could do that. So then what do you do?
Maybe try to figure out what they can do. If they can do even one little thing, like you mentioned about reproducibly building from source. Like that's something. It's a start.
Yeah, you have to make little goals, but it's sort of like have you ever seen the video of the guy who's he's a disabled veteran and he starts doing yoga with Diamond Dallas Page, and he goes from like barely being able to walk with crutches to running? Has
I
anyone
haven't
seen
seen
this?
that, but that's amazing.
I kind of feel like that's what these organizations need to go through, but they need the force of will. They need a combination of their own will and someone believing in them and a little bit of coaching along the way to get better. But they're capable of everything. They already have the people, they have the talent, they have the mission, and in many cases they have someone inside the organization that's going to tell them the exact same words I will, exact same things I would recommend. They don't have the faith to take that first step.
I would say there's also a level of validation that comes with an outside party that maybe has no prejudices or investment in like how the organization is run today, comes in and says, hey, I noticed this thing and it's the same thing that you're thinking, but I'm going to reinforce it for you. And that's not just for the individual that's saying that and needs that validation and backup, but also for the rest of the organization, where they say, oh, we know whomever has been giving us great advice, but now this is validated by the expert that came in. It's sort of I think that's true regardless of which technology we're talking about.
It's just one of the weird dynamics of consulting, I think.
Yeah. The consultants came in and they will save the day.
Hey, Andrew, I think we might be the grown-ups in the room that people are supposed to listen to. Well, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you're going to listen to me. What could possibly go wrong?
It's probably fine.
Yeah. That's the thing, is you want people to have good results, and then there's these big outcomes that they want, and for you just to say things that, whether they do them or not, like that's just a lot of responsibility.
Well, but also you come in for 2 weeks, and this organization has had its dysfunction for years or decades. There's only so much you're going to do in that small period of time, and hopefully you're going to instill some kernel of change in there that then ripples out and becomes and has the effect that the organization was desiring. But like as a consultant, you're only there for a certain period of time. You can't expect that by the time you're out the door, it's going to be rainbows and unicorns.
You're just a butterfly flapping its wings. And with that, I think we'll call it a night.
Yep.
Until next time.
Wow.
I think it's may the force be with you is appropriate.
Works for me.
Yep.